QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Customize invoice using additional customization settings. Let's get into it with Intuit. QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Here we are in our test template file homepage. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the view dropdown, selecting the open windows list. We're now going to go to the list dropdown. We're going to take a look at the templates list. Within the templates lists, we created a new template, the invoice number 1 template. That's the one we're going to be continuing to customize here. But if you wanted to test out a new template, then of course you can go to the template dropdown or rise up, and you can go to the new item here, select an invoice, and follow along in that way as well. Once you have one open, you can right click on it and you can edit the template, or you can just simply double click on it, probably a little bit faster. That takes you into the basic settings we took a look at last time. So if you want to look at these settings, then take a look at the prior presentation. We have two other areas that we can go. One is the additional customization. This will often be useful for basically the kind of set columns that we'll be using, the columns that we might need more columns or less columns, depending on the type of industry we are in. And then we have the layout designer we'll take a look at in the future, which gives you a whole lot more flexibility to customize the layout of the invoice of the form. So let's first take a look at the additional customization, which is a nice setting for those that aren't designers such as myself, that have kind of like the stock information that you could basically add or take away in a nice little checkoff format here. So we have the tabs up top. We got the header tab, the column tab, the footer tab, the print tab up top. Now we're looking at the preview to the right-hand side. We're remembering this is going to be an invoice that we're going to be giving to a customer for work that had been done, but for which we had not yet received payment on it. So what do we want to include then? One, we have the screen options, what shows up on our side when we're filling something out. And two, the printing options, or in other words, the options that will be seen by the customer when we print it out or email it out or send it out. Notice those two could be different. We might want something on our screen so that we can check it out, but that we don't want showing up on the invoice when we send it to the customer. So the default title, so once again, you can click on or off with the title information, so you can take them off of the screen and or the print information. The title of the invoice now then disappears. If you want to put the title back on, call it an invoice, there we have it. If you want to name it something other than an invoice, invoice is the term that we have within the system that represents us, billing the client. To the client, if they use QuickBooks, the invoice would be a bill. So you might want to rename it or something like invoice/bill or something like that if you want to put a different name on the invoice, and that would populate then up top here. And then we have the date on it, so we can either turn the date on or off, of course, so we can remove the date of it. I would think that the date would be beneficial for the most part, so I'll typically have the date on both sides. And then the invoice number. Now the invoice number is something that's going to be generated automatically typically, so it's going to be a kind of an internal control. I don't see any harm having it there. I like having the internal control of the invoice number, at least on my side. I don't see any harm really putting it on there for the employer side as well, so I keep that on there. The ship to, if that is going to be a necessary field, then you can put the ship to information up top as well. So notice we now have the bill to and then the ship to. This would be more relevant or more necessary if those two things were different from time to time. And then we have the SO number or sales order number. If this would be applicable, we can turn that on. If it's not applicable, we'll keep that off. So the special order number, I'll keep that off for now. And then we have the terms here. This is when we want to get paid by within the terms. We obviously would typically want that on our screen. I would think we would want the terms on there as well. So we have the terms here. And then we have the due date. Do we want to have the due date on the form? I think oftentimes it'll be useful to have it on the form, to have, when it's going to be due on the form. So that's now included here. And then rep, if the rep is going to be appropriate to have on the form, we can add that. I'm going to keep that off for myself. The account number, if it's useful to have basically the account number on the form, we can add then the account number. Probably not useful most of the time for the printing option for it. Then the ship date, it might be useful for us to have the ship date, so we can include that. And obviously the more items you have, it kind of muddies up the look of the form. We have a whole lot more fields on the form, so if you don't need some of these items, it might be worthwhile then to take them off to clean up the look and feel of the form. Ship via, You can have the options for the shipping on the form. So we can add those items. So, and then we have FOB, so shipping point destination, and then the project or job we can have, and then other if we want to add some kind of other field down below, we can add the other field. And then if you would like to customize the name on anything of these, just like we did with the title, you can customize, the name on these options, the thank you field, and adjust those as well. So then if you wanted to go back to the default settings, you can select this item. That will then take you back to the default settings. You can also make the template inactive in this area as well. So if you don't want to be using the template, especially if you're just testing it out, you can make the template inactive. That means it will not be showing up as one of the options to select when you go to the invoice and actually create an invoice. So then we have the columns. So I'm going to say OK. And this is where you can arrange basically the columns here that we have that's going to be showing up on the invoice. So we have on the screen, on printing, again, you can kind of differentiate between those two. The ordering of the columns, so item is currently number 1. Then we have the description, and then we have the quantity and the rate. You can adjust the order of those by adjusting the ordering column here, and you can adjust basically the names to the right in a similar fashion as we saw before. So if we want, for example, the date on it, let's add the date and just see what we have here that's going to be added in column 5. And then the item is something that we'll typically use internally. And then so typically, oftentimes, you might just want to show the description to the customer, but you might want to show them the item column as well. And if you want to turn that on, it'll show here. And this is basically showing kind of the printing options right here. So now we've got the item there. And then the description, typically you're going to want the description on there. That's going to be our description column, showing to our side and to the client side. Manufacturer part number, if applicable, then you can have this here. If there's a manufactured part number that you might want internally, possibly internally, not externally. The quantity, so the quantity field, you would think you would want that somewhere. So you'd have the quantity on there that you're selling of the items. These are, you can imagine these as service items or inventory items or possibly, hourly service or something like that, the number then. And then the rate, so the rate for it, if it's an hourly item, then you can have the hourly rate. If we're selling inventory, the rate then, and then we've got the amount, which is going to be here. And then if we wanted to add some other columns, we can add other columns that would be customized then down below. So if we changed up these columns, we could then say that maybe we want the description first. So maybe I say description should be number 1, and then maybe I still want the item, but I want it to change to number 2. So now we've got description and then item, then quantity, then the rate, and then the served, and then finally the amount. Now the amount's default at 6, so it basically has to be last here because it's got to kind of, they want it to kind of line up with the columns at the total at the bottom. So you might want then, the served next to the item. So maybe I want the served to be like number 3. So I'll say served date. Maybe this one will bring that to number 3. And say okay. So continue. Now we got the description, item, served, and then the quantity, and then the rate, basically next to each other. So anyways, you can test those out. You can have different combinations of these items. It's nice that they're nice and preset for you so that you can kind of move them around. You can do a whole lot more customization with the layout designer we'll talk about later. And then we've got the footer here. And most of these are pretty straightforward on the footer. We got the custom message down at the bottom here. We've got the total. So obviously we need the total down here. So that's typically going to be, part of the setting. Payment credits. So if there's any credits or prepayments by the customer, you have that there. If you want to rename it from like payments or prepayments or something like that, then we might change the name or something like that. But you're going to want the field there. And then the balance due. So we're going to have the balance due down below again. Somewhat standardized. We basically need the balance due down there. Customer balance total. So you can test these out if they're going to be applicable to you with the customer balance total and the job total balance. And then you have a custom field down here that you could put like a custom message like, thank you again here down here. And I can preview that. So if we were to preview that, that's going to show up right there. So next we have the printing options. So if we go on over to the printing options, it says use invoice printer settings from the printer setup. That's going to be the default, or you can use specific I'm going to close that out. Specific printer settings below for this invoice. So the number would be 1. You can change the number of it, portrait or landscape, and so on and so forth. I would typically stick with the standard unless you have special needs there. And then print page number on forms with more than 2 pages. So typically it's a 1-page form. So if you want the page number on multiple pages, if there were multiple pages, which could be the case if you're doing like construction or job costing or something like that, you might have very long invoices, and therefore you could have the page number on multiple pages. And then the trailing zeros, if you wanted to include those, you have that option here as well. So I'm going to say okay. That's going to be our general options for this section. I'm going to say okay. We just went through the additional customization section. Next time we'll go through some of the layout designer areas, which I'll say right now is above me in terms of the designing quality. I'm not a designer, so we'll take a look at some of the options in there, however, and then you could see some. And then we'll take a look at some of the custom invoices that have been made by people who are clearly very good with the layout designer, and then you can learn enough from them, hopefully, to take those design tools, those designed invoices, and then customize them to yourself with those functions. So I'm going to say okay. Let's just take a look at the invoice right now by going to the home page. And then if we were to create an invoice, then we have the drop down to find the template that we're using, which is invoice number 1. Here's our invoice. Once again, the data input changes a little bit. You can see we have a lot more fields here because we added these more fields that are necessary to populate with the data input, but not everything is going to show up here. We also have that custom message field down here that you can give kind of the custom message, and you can add a new custom message down below, and then the memo. And then if we were to view this, we can go to the print and then the preview from this screen. You get kind of a larger, preview screen here. And so that's what we have thus far. Again, it's not the nicest looking thing, but it's, that's how you can customize it, not how you want to actually make the invoice at this point in time. It's how you use the tools, not the end product that you possibly want at this point. So we'll continue on with the next set of tools next time.